The next speaker is Dr. Venkatesh
Okay.
at
Actually, I have to
Chembrolu.
leave
He is Associate Professor,
I want to ask this.
IKSMA Center. IKSMA means the Indian Knowledge System and Mental Health Application, IIT Mandi. And the topic name is Entangled Realities, Perception, Action, and the Conscious World in IKS Framework. Welcome.
Okay, good evening. So we're getting towards the end of the today's session. Mine is the second last talk, so I won't take too much time. So this is about Enigma of perception. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophy and a little bit about the scientific work we're trying to do around perception. I don't know why my slide is moving like that, but I think it's okay. Not really, but okay. Anyway, I'll see how to. Yeah, so my background is also not in philosophy. I'm not a philosopher by training, but I've just tried to learn philosophy by reading it myself. My background is in science and engineering also. So anyway, so title and abstract. I just wanted to read out my abstract in case it has not been read by the audience before. This entangled realities, perception, action, and the conscious world in IKS framework. This talk explores how ancient Indian philosophical insights in many ways complement modern cognitive science frameworks. It examines perception not as passive reception but an active reality generating process and action as continuous extension of awareness. So, by recentering conscious self in a dynamic loop, we explore new ways of examining meaning and so on, nature of reality. Okay. So, it's good that I'll finish my talk on time. Really derived from philosophical texts, but if you just ask any academic person, like in science background, they may say that the process by which we filter and interpret information gathered by our senses to create a picture of the world, right? So this picture of the world is important because there is a distinction naturally drawn here between the world and the picture of the world. The two need not be the same. And anyway, I think we don't need to go over this, but many of you have must have seen this image, right? At first instance, we see an old woman, but I think we can reorienting our vision, we can see a younger woman looking away from the screen. Are you seeing both younger and older woman? No? You saw the younger first? Okay, so you are a little unique. most most see the old woman first. So if you consider these are the lips and that as the nose, you see the old woman, right? But now if you see this as the neck, that as the face and that as the nose, you would see and this is jawline, you'd see the younger woman looking away, right? Yes or no? You can't see the older woman. Okay, so if you see this as the eyes, one eye, the other eye, the nose, and this as the mouth, and this as the chin. Yeah, so that's the older woman. And do you all see the younger woman? You only see no mother-in-law. Okay. So anyway, this is a very famous cartoon drawn by this William Hill in 1915. So he kind of drew a combined picture of his wife and mother-in-law in some sense. So anyway, so why do people have different perceptions? Common again understandings, physical differences in our senses, past experience, present state of mind, maybe that can influence our perception. So we'll come back to this notion of world and picture of the world towards the end. And one advantage of going towards the end of the session is I don't have to talk about these basic things one more time. But according to IKS, or general IKS framework, right? I'm not really referring to any specific philosophy here. But I think the general IKS corpus agrees with this notion that there is the senses which gather information, there is integration that takes place at a certain level in terms of filtration, interpretation, but ultimately the observer or the seer, the experiencer is involved in the process, and ultimately the understanding of perception will be incomplete without talking about experience, right? And experience, if we can think of it as a phenomena, then this is a phenomena that we are witnessing, we are undergoing that all the time. So in some sense this is a three-stage process, but not always taken so in the scientific realm, right? In the senses and the integration part, maybe the perception is tried to be explained. And so from IK's perspective, we have this insight that we need to take into account the observer, or take into account the experience aspect that is associated with perception. So Enigma 1. So what is Enigma 1? So how does our biological system give rise to this notion of phenomenal experience, right? And the answer, as bold and maybe as um, different as it may sound from the general academic circles in science, is that it cannot, and it does not. So the first perspective I want to share with you from IK's point of view is that consciousness is fundamental. I think I don't need to work too hard trying to convey this message to this audience, but when we stand in front of a room full of scientists, it's a much harder sell. So the first point I want to emphasize here is that in some sense we have to think of consciousness as fundamental, as not as emergent or coming out of the functioning of the brain or something like that, right? Not a result of the biological system, but something higher and more subtle than that. The next point I want to make is about perception and action. So if we think of the conscious observer, um, covered with a layer of integration over here, which is helping in the process of perception, and we can think of perception as a channel that transmits information from the environment into the system that we call is that a system into which the observer is embedded. Then just because of the way I have drawn this diagram, you can see that the action is the counterpart of perception. If one thinks of perception as a process where information is coming in, action can be thought of as a process where information is going out into the environment. And it is somewhat intuitive to think that action is influenced by perception. Why? Because whatever you perceive and understand, accordingly you act. But action also affects perception according to this. Why? Because action affects the environment, and the environment feeds into the perception. So action also affects perception. So it's like a loop, basically, right? And so that's why I mentioned perception affects action and vice versa. So the Enigma 2 is how to treat perception and action on an equal footing as somewhat inverse processes of each other, right? So since although the theme for the conference or today's gathering is Enigma of perception, but perception and action have to be treated on an equal footing. Otherwise, we only get half of the story. So action is the other side of the same coin. So in this case, a very unique perspective that we get from IKS understanding again is that what we are dealing with, the kind of information that we're dealing with, is not like raw bits of data in terms of zeros and ones, which are pretty much have no meaning. But what we're dealing with is semantic information that carries meaning. And because information that we're dealing with is semantic in nature, therefore our experience at the end of the day is meaningful, right? So all our perception, all our experiences that we have, they carry certain meaning. So from the environment we gather meaning. At the end of the day, meaning is what we extract in the process of perceiving. And when we relay information back to the environment, we are also communicating, conveying meaning meaning back into the environment. So this embeddedness of meaning into the scheme of things is very important, and IKS gives us this perspective that we can rethink of information as semantic information. So this is a very different way of thinking of information, and this will help us, redefine pretty much information theory and how how we process information and so on. So that's Enigma 2. And after that, we need to think about the nature of the world itself. Why? Because in the beginning we had this common sense definition of what is perception. To create, there was this sentence ending with to create a picture of the world. And I mentioned we should take a note of this distinction between the world and the picture of the world. So what happens in science, although we have this distinction that the world that we are creating within ourselves as a result of perception is a picture of the world. It's not exactly represented. It is representing the world in some way, but it's not the world itself. But however, when we go about developing scientific theories, we actually assume the existence of the world just as we are perceiving it. So, for instance, all classical theories in physics are designed in that way. And just by exploring the limits of length and time scales, we happen to hit the quantum scale, and we develop new mathematics to explain quantum physics. But at the end of the day, when we think about quantum experiments, we still think of collapse and classical ways to interpret the data, right? So even though we philosophically understand the picture of the world is not same as the world, but we continue to treat the world in the way we perceive it, even while developing scientific theories. Um, the other thing that we also usually tend to carry the notion of is that of that an objective world. Science is an effort or an endeavor to describe the world in an objective manner. Objective means that it is independent of my perception as an individual, right? So the table exists independent of my perception and all of our perceptions. So therefore, it exists independent of us. So we can describe it and study it and so on. And the same notion of this world, the notion of the world that we are carrying within us, of these first 2 points, that same world is now again used to describe perception itself. How? Because perception is explained in terms of the mechanics of senses gathering input from the environment and the brain processing electrical signals that are transmitted to it, and then somehow perception is taking place with the help of the brain mechanics. So the whole thing seems to be topsy-turvy if we look at it from philosophical point of view. So in terms of a little bit of symbols, I've tried to represent this. So first over here is that we tend to think of W as equal to W prime, which is a function of perception. W prime here is the representing the picture of the world. So that actually is not true, right? So that's an issue. A perception is a function of the world. We kind of can agree on that, because the nature of the world would influence our perception. And if you just put these two things together, perception becomes a function of something which is a function of perception. So you go into a recursive loop, a never ending loop, and then we end up in a framework that we can never understand perception. So even though it sounds very simple and logical over here, but the whole scientific endeavor is to still crank out this machine over and over again, try to understand perception, but you can never really get to the bottom of it. So so the Enigma 3 is, how can we ever understand perception? And here I'm asking this question from the scientific framework. So here the IKS perspective is that the nature of world, this issue of the recursive infinite recursion that I showed you on the previous slide, it can be broken and it can be resolved by this one insight that we get from IKS, which is the nature of the world itself is also rooted in consciousness. It's not only the nature of the self, but the nature of the world also is rooted in consciousness. And what does that do? First, it helps us resolve the very first contradiction, that the world need not be the same as the picture of the world, which is indicated by W prime. And now, and we can continue to maintain that the perception is a function of the world, but the W prime is now reinterpreted as another function of the world and perception. So now things can be set right. And then what you have here is a world which is also rooted in consciousness, but what you're actually perceiving is not that conscious world, but you're perceiving something in between, which is called as W prime, represented as W prime. And that world of perception, it is can be this picture of the world, or rather a video of the world, because the live feed that we're getting continuously into our perceptual system. And the world, in some sense, is looking out, is appearing to be a world of material objects, right? We are surrounded by matter, including our body. So all this is a perceptual field. All this is happening in a perceptual field, but ultimately the nature of the world is that of consciousness. So here, another big change that needs to take place in our perspective of the world is that subjectivity is inherent to the nature of the world. So by trying to enforce that we need to understand the world in an objective way, or by trying to reduce the world to objective frameworks, we're actually missing out on understanding of reality. So subjectivity is now inherently a part of the nature of the world, and it can never be without it, and which is why our subjective experience now becomes the center. It becomes the center for understanding the world. It's not the material objects around us. So the challenge that lies ahead, because of the three enigmas that I quickly went over, I think these three IKS perspectives need to be blended together. The first one is consciousness being fundamental, right? And here, when I said consciousness being fundamental, I meant more about the self, consciousness of the self. Second, we need to build a framework for dealing with information in a semantic manner, right? Information that carries meaning. So we have an opportunity to redefine information theory and how perception takes place, and the nature of the world also rooted in consciousness. So a lot of IKS insights brought together, but the challenge is that how we develop a coherent conceptual and mathematical framework to redefine perception and the nature of reality. So understanding of perception will go hand in hand with the understanding of the nature of reality, because the two are entangled together. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. So it's a very short talk, but it's just laying down few ideas that have come about in the past year or so. This is in collaboration with Dr. Jyotiranjan as well. He was at IT Mandi for a few years. So that's my contact. Feel free to contact me, but we can also have some discussion here. Yes. Yeah, I see two hands, so we can take comments or questions. So here, Professor Arindam Chakrabarty. Here. Yes, sir.
I really learned a lot, as I was expecting to, from Jyotiranjan's and your talk. Whatever I'm going to say is constructive. There was very different, interesting complementarity. Jyotiranjan's talk was very satisfying to me, because both in philosophy as well as in Sanskrit studies and whatever you call knowledge system, the details are extremely important. What I absolutely detest when not people like you, but when the sort of IIT kind of people get into late life or midlife, grant motivated Indian philosophies, usually is such a sort of insufferable litany of cliches that everyone, all gurus say everything, and neither of you did any of that, which was good. Yours was synoptic, not so much in details. But whatever I'm saying is in the spirit of starting really what we came for this conference for. Not to report our individual researches, but at the end of the day, to have a real bridge between the two. So I was slightly disappointed when I very carefully heard that you almost use synonymously the two phrases. Those with an academic, that is, scientific background, you said. Now, you can understand why that synonymy is objectionable. But the purpose was to actually bridge the Pandit slash Sanskrit Western philosophy experts with the neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, mathematicians, computer scientists. And as a starter of that bridge, I think we, from the philosophy Pandit side, I have taken some steps on that. In 2005, with Varakhedi did the, Professor Srinivasa Varakhedi, he did the proofreading. I did for the Pandits a Sanskrit book called Adhunika Pratyakṣa Pramana Mimamsa, which is about post-Bertrand Russell, after Russell Whitehead's work on Principia Mathematica, post-Bertrand Russell and post-Wittgenstein, Western philosophy of mind and theory of knowledge, on memory, on perception, on inference. But entire thing was on Russell, Leibniz, etc., and some Wittgenstein in Sanskrit. So the Pandits can speak to it, and they did. Now it seems like since the IKS specialists are almost unashamedly not interested in studying the Sanskrit texts. So we need to not train you guys, but I need to, and the Pandits need to find out how to understand, for example, a simple expression like W is a function of P, something like that. So what does F within parenthesis P mean? But this will work only if you guys pick up the technical symbolic language of Sanskrit philosophy post-Gangesha. You need to understand what is a pratiyogita, avachedakata. Absence requires absentees. Absentees, if I may miss, here there is absence of the Vice Chancellor of Sanskrit universities. There is also absence of my friend Varakhedi. The two absences have totally two different qualifiers. But in my cognition, this is very different absences. But the absentee is the same person. Because I perceive the absence, somebody else perceives the absence of our Vice Chancellor. I perceive the absence of my friend Srinivasa. This is just first year class 10 Nyaya. Okay. And from there you build Pratiyogita, Vachedaka, and so on. And not regard them as useless hair splitting. Because just as perception is half the story, action is the other. Similarly, technicalization of a discipline like epistemology, theory of knowledge, theory of inference, theory of subjunctive inferences, where the antecedents of the conditionals are all false. For example, had Jyotiranjan been born in Sweden and learnt only Greek language, then consequent clause. So from that point of view, there is a lot of reinventing the wheel that you guys are doing.
Okay.
For example, about the three enigmas, the first enigma has been extremely well explored in Western philosophy and by Buddhism. Not in Western physics. You won't find it in the dialogue between Heisenberg and Einstein. But Leibniz wrote monadology. Spinoza wrote through geometrical method,
Yes, yes.
everything.
Correct. Yeah.
So this question, for example, in cognitive science, a very important question would be that when does a cognition, which is of a nature of passive information intake, when does it turn into a decision to act? Seeing, recognizing that's a snake and running. In between, what happens? Now, this is discussed a huge lot. Is the actual world snake making me run, or my picture of the snake? Well thrashed out.
Yes.
Okay? And it is a mark of undetailed work. And I'm saying this constructively because I'm sure you will get into the detail.
Yes.
To say, especially about something as pluralistic as Indian philosophy and Indian knowledge systems, that the overall IKS view is that consciousness is fundamental in reality. He mentioned Sankhya, you mentioned Sankhya. That goes completely against Sankhya. Why? Because most of the world is Prakriti, which is not consciousness. Now you might say, oh, ultimately that theory was rejected, that is dualistic. Who says that all of Indian knowledge system is non-dualistic? Advaita Vedantin says that. Sringeri Mutt says that. But if you go to, Udupi, go to a Madhva, go ask Varakhedi. 5 distinctions, dualities, are absolutely fundamental to reality. Distinction between one person and another person, consciousness, 2 consciousnesses. They are never the same. Distinction between God and the world, second. Distinction between God and the consciousness. Distinction between 2 material objects. These distinctions are never to be reduced. That it is a mistake of our mind. One day we will all become unified. Madhva will curse you and will say you are a Buddhist in disguise if you are talking about non-dualism. That is the fun. And yet, we have not burnt each other's temples. Sringeri Ashram, which is Shankarite, which Shankara was called by Madhva a closet Buddhist. And Shankara will go to hell, according to them. But every year for the last 100 years, they honor a dualist scholar. This is our tradition. That ethics of tolerating difference is absolutely essential, even from the scientific point of view and academic point of view. Because otherwise, you will be searching like late old Einstein, a unified field theory of everything, and until everybody agrees with that, you will be frustrated. But it's an ongoing process. So, but I really learned towards the end, I have one agenda. Like you said, perception action we have thrashed out. We will till the end, even the last paper, Nivedita Chaturvedis, we'll talk about that. But one thing we have not explored. You used that word. We spent a lifetime exploring that word, which is perception must become meaningful. What is meaningfulness? Science doesn't say anything about it. From meaningful, adjective, semantic. Many theories of meaning. Many. We said realist theory, anti-theorist, truth functional theory of meaning, truth conditional theory of meaning, intuitionist theory of meaning, anti-realist theories of meaning. They don't know anything about it. And if you ask, what is Shabdartha, Padartha, Vakyartha? You have to know Bhartriyari. But I'm not giving more tasks, but we have to explore the concept of meaning.
Yeah.
Very important. And don't abolish concept of meaning for philosophers. Philosophers and you guys together
Yeah.
can explore that. And
That's correct, yeah.
different systems will give you help. Yes. Sorry for...
Yeah, we actually need a lot of guidance from you.
No, I'm sorry for such a long thing, but I was trying to bring in together.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was not well aware about the audience, so I kept the talk very generic and very high level. I kind of excluded the details, but
He did. He
Huh?
did. That's very good.
Yeah,
He did.
he has. Yeah.
No, the audience, I mean, we should not, we should not talk down to the audience.
Right.
We have to, raise the audience always, So, the popular book publisher Penguin, Penguin Books, which is, when they offered me a contract with some advance, and they said, we know you write technical philosophy, don't write down to us. Write, because in our highest technicality, like a good mathematician, we write clearly. We don't obfuscate. But it has to be semantically significant. It's still obfuscation, not simplification.
Right.
Simplification will give the details.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. There was one maybe question here.
Namaste. So, this your comment about mathematical models brought something that we a lot of us have been. We had a conference on knowing IKS terms. I think that's the first thing that all people not trained in, other than learning Sanskritam, of course, and really doing text and understanding. I think first thing we all did was make a list of terms and then sit down and understand where everything came from. And your comment about how, mathematical models to describe. So my understanding from IKS is a Vastu and Vastu kind of an analogy. So there is a water and there is a bottle. So your water is in the bottle, you can carry milk also in the bottle. So your bottle is basically mathematics. So you can take that out of anything and then apply it across. So I was wondering if there is any parallel to, has anybody explored these kind of models for consciousness or?
So we are just beginning to develop those. We don't have it fully developed. It's in the works. I mean, we are collaborating, Jyotiranjan and myself and few others. We have some ideas, and one of the things that you saw in his flocking of birds example, right, is that of quantum entanglement. So the idea that we are exploring here is that perception is like an entangling process between the observer, the conscious observer, and the world. So instead of thinking of perception as a classical process of information relaying from the world to the observer, we try to model it as an entangling process. So basically use quantum formalism of entanglement for perception and same for action. So basically we are in some sense entangled with the world when we are perceiving and when action is being performed. So
Sorry, one interruption. If I understood Jyotiranjan, even his simplest clearest was not a two-term relation of entanglement, but a three-term one, which is observer, other observers, and the world. Because there is a
Right.
feedback loop
right,
from, because every observer is doing a triangulation,
correct, yeah,
that is, to the world, to the other observer, and to his assessment of what the other observer, how the other observer.
correct.
And even the bird is doing it.
Right.
even the bird which is following other birds. So it is not like the Darwinian would say, oh, well, unconsciously they are just doing it. Of course they are not first forming a physical perception. Okay, I will now follow the other bird, not like that. But it looks like at least a three-term thing. Okay, so I called my last big book Object, Subject, and Other Subject. So you see other birds, because you gave that picture. One bird has two options. Each of those birds has other two options. And as a result, this whole thing comes.
Right.
What he's talking about also includes that. It didn't spell out the details, but there we're talking about many conscious agents.
Yeah, network of conscious agents. So just like there are many birds and they form a group and flock together. So there is one conscious agent which is interacting with the world through this process of entanglement, but there are other conscious agents also entangled with the world. So therefore there is the interaction between different conscious agents going on. So it's like a network.
Common shared reality is
Common.
emerging out of this network of interactions, perception and
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, in this mathematical model, for example, with the birds, when they do murmurations, they showed that the motion is similar to that of helium when it's very cold. So the equations are same again across its. And then recently there's another paper that talks about these extremities having. So the behavior of the extremes dictated the direction of the birds flocking. Did you look at those papers? Again this. This is also so the form is actually something that if you this is something that is interesting for somebody from physics background like me to know where this is headed in
Yeah,
in
sure.
the
So we can exchange some
Yeah,
contacts.
sure.
after this. Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you for the feedback.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Venkatesh.